This is the moment that Rita Pangalangan allowed her daughter Cristina to be placed in the back seat of a scorching hot car where she would effectively bake to death. For 5 hours and 41 minutes, Cristina would be trapped with no way out, eventually dying in the most cruel and unimaginable way. The question was her death the result of simple negligence or cold, calculated murder? On August 5th, 2019, 13-year-old Cristina Pangalangan died of heat stroke after being trapped inside a Volkswagen for 5 hours and 41 minutes. The teen, who suffered from cerebral palsy and could not speak, had been placed inside the vehicle by her mother, Rita, and Rita's then-boyfriend, Larry Eugene King Jr. The pair were at the time. Cristina could not open the car door or even cry for help, and was left to burn in the heat of the South Carolina sun. A well-educated, well-respected woman, Rita Pangalangan was convicted of murder. So how did it come to this? Rita had obtained both a bachelor's degree and a master's while studying. In college, she met Walter Pangalangan, and the pair had their first child, Ashley, in 1989. 3 years later, Rita gave birth to their second daughter, Elizabeth. It was 14 years later that Rita's life changed unexpectedly when she found out she was pregnant. On March 28, 2006, little Cristina was born. Cristina's condition was complicated as she had cerebral palsy, spastic quadriplegia, developmental delays, and a seizure disorder. Cristina was afflicted with the most severe form of cerebral palsy, as it affected all 4 limbs, her torso, and her face. In addition to this, Cristina also had dysphagia, which meant she had difficulty swallowing. She could only consume small amounts and got the majority of her nutrients from meal replacement shakes. But despite her circumstances, Cristina was vibrant and happy and was known to always have a smile on her face. As Cristina got older, her father Walter began heading down a dark path, turning to illegal substance abuse. This caused friction in his relationship with Rita. Rita had to begin taking care of Cristina on her own. Even with help, raising Cristina was a difficult task, and with Walter unable to contribute, Rita decided to separate from him. The only problem was that this meant losing a substantial second income. Rita began working as a part-time cleaner in addition to her full-time teaching position to support herself and Cristina. For a while, things seemed to be progressing well. But in 2014, all that began to change. The twice-nominated Teacher of the Year met and began dating Larry Eugene King Jr. Larry was different from Rita. He liked to party, was part of the biker scene, and often frequented local bars. Before he had met Rita, he had also been addicted to. When he met Rita, he was sober and had been for some time, but that changed after his 2 sons left his home. After that, he began sporadically binging on, which caused problems between him and Rita. The pair would often break up and get back together, repeating the same cycle over and over. Those around Rita noticed a change in her. She began wanting to do the same things Larry liked, such as partying, going to bars, and riding on the back of his motorcycle. But the burden of having Cristina as a daughter hindered this new carefree attitude Rita was adopting. In 2018, Rita rented out one of the rooms in her house for extra income. Her tenant was a single working mother named Brittany. Brittany would later report that at first, everything was fine within the home. But as the months passed, the house gradually became more and more filthy, and the stench of urine permeated the air, particularly in Cristina's room. Rita would also allegedly drop Cristina in the living room and retreat to her own bedroom, closing the door behind her to talk on the phone to Larry for hours. Often, Cristina would crawl to Rita's door and try to get in, screaming and crying for her mother, but Rita just ignored her. Eventually, Rita began asking Brittany to babysit Cristina. On one occasion, she asked Brittany to watch her overnight, but when Brittany said she had work the next day, Rita reportedly responded by saying, "If you just take her to work with you, you can leave her in the car with the windows down. I do it all the time." Rita had also told Brittany something strange. Never open the door to anyone asking for her. What Rita didn't tell her was that the strangers often knocking on the door seeking out Rita were actually from Child Protective Services. Christina's teachers had reported noticing untreated injuries on her body. Over 3 years, 4 calls had been made to CPS by these teachers, with one describing how Cristina had come to school with burn marks and oozing blisters on her body. Despite asking Rita to take her to the doctor to treat the wounds, Cristina turned up the next day with her wounds untended. Things would only get worse from then onwards. On August 1st, 2019, Brittany moved out of Rita's house, which meant one less person to look after Cristina. Without anyone to watch her, she would often have to go with Rita to whichever child developmental class she was teaching. There, Rita met student Lindsay Lewis, who took an interest in babysitting Cristina for her. The day she agreed to babysit, she was shocked to discover that Rita had decided not to come home that evening, nor the following day. In fact, she only returned home after 5 p.m. that Sunday. Her excuse was that Larry had food poisoning and she needed to take care of him. Once Rita returned home, she loaded Cristina into her car and the pair set off for Larry's house, where they spent the night. The next morning, Rita and Larry would be spotted on the home's security footage arguing outside by the porch. At roughly 11 a.m., after the pair retreated into the house, they emerged, this time with Larry carrying Cristina. Roughly, he opened the car door and threw her down onto the back seat. Roughly 6 hours later, police were called to the residence. The first responding officer was greeted by a horrific sight. Cristina was lying face down in the grass. Her body was covered in angry red welts and burn marks with oozing blisters. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but unfortunately pronounced Cristina dead at the scene. Upon taking her temperature, they were shocked to see the thermometer reach 110 degrees. What's worse is that it was likely much higher, as the thermometer could only read as far as 110. When Larry and Rita were questioned, Rita claimed she had only left Cristina in the car for a few minutes and that the air conditioning was on. But this was a blatant lie. Security footage revealed that Cristina had been left in the car for over 5 hours. Both Larry and Rita were charged with murder, criminal conspiracy, and great bodily harm to a child. Despite their claims that the car and the air conditioning were on, the footage would reveal the whole disturbing truth. As the trial commenced in August 2023, a torrent of heinous information would be revealed to the jury, leading many to suspect that Cristina's death had actually been premeditated. Against their defense attorney's advice, both Larry and Rita pleaded not guilty, refusing a plea deal. When questioned about why they were arguing the morning of Cristina's death, Larry claimed it was over a suspected infidelity and that the two were sleep-deprived after a weekend of partying and binging. While arguing, he allegedly asked Rita to leave and helped to carry Cristina to the car. In the footage, it is clear that the car is off, nor did any lights flash to indicate that Rita had used her push-to-start key fob. In the South Carolina sun, the internal temperature of the car would have reached over 130 degrees. Rita and Larry continued arguing after Cristina was placed in the car before going back inside the house. They emerged again at 1:45 p.m., but neglected to check on Cristina. Instead, they stood on the porch, talking and embracing. Their embrace led to heavy kissing, and the two decided to go back inside again to have. Rita came back outside at 3 p.m., but not to check on her youngest daughter. She'd actually come out to fetch her cigarettes, but the doors were locked. The couple didn't panic. They simply tried to open the window with a coat hanger. When that didn't work, they returned to the porch and sat on the swing in front for 15 minutes. Then, after shaking the car in a bizarre attempt to shift the windows open, they decided to take Larry's truck to Rita's home and fetch the spare set of keys. They returned an hour later, but again, were in no hurry and sat in the truck talking for several minutes. Larry then tried using the extra key fob to unlock the doors. However, instead of pushing the unlock button, he kept pushing the lock button. If the ordeal hadn't been so horrific, it might have even been comedic. The video footage showed the car lights flashing. This was an important point, because if the car had been running, the lights would not have flashed according to the make of the model. Eventually, at 4:50 p.m., Larry and Rita realized in their intoxicated state that they could just use the key to unlock the doors. It was then that they discovered Cristina's lifeless body. In a strange and emotionless move, Larry removed Cristina's limp figure and laid her face down in the dirt. Rita, having just lost her youngest daughter, simply went back into the house, making no effort to revive her. The autopsy report found that Cristina's lungs contained vomit, and her diaper was completely soiled. The examination also revealed she was severely malnourished and had several untreated infections. It seemed she had been neglected in more ways than one, and for a prolonged period. Rita claimed she hadn't voluntarily gotten and her daughter Ashley would later go on to suggest that Larry had her. It seems unlikely that Rita would have embraced Larry and had intercourse with him had she suspected he had her against her will. What's more alarming, her neglect of her daughter was highlighted by the revelation of what police found in the back seat. Lying carelessly on top of a black duffel bag was a fully loaded 9mm handgun. It had been next to Cristina the entire time. This cast significant doubt on the defense's claim that Larry and Rita did not intend to kill Cristina. What was the reason for leaving a loaded gun next to a 13-year-old, regardless of her motor capabilities? Perhaps Rita thought Cristina's fine motor skills were too poor to fire a weapon and cause any real damage. Or perhaps she hoped Cristina would actually use the weapon on herself and claim it as an accident. During the trial, the public was also stunned by Rita's daughter Elizabeth's testimony. Despite her claims to love her sister, there seemed to be a general feeling of disdain towards her. This was apparent in Elizabeth's words when she described Cristina as unphotogenic and that her hair was always a hot mess because she didn't get the good Asian genes that Elizabeth had gotten. Both Ashley and Elizabeth maintained that Cristina was loved and that Rita was a fantastic mother. But their pleas for mercy weren't enough. After hearing all the evidence presented, it took the jury 2 hours to form a unanimous verdict against Larry and Rita. On September 1st, 2023, the jury found both guilty of murder. Rita exclaimed, "Oh my God," and had to sit down as her knees went weak. She began sobbing hysterically, unable to believe she had been convicted. In this deluded woman's mind, she thought she might walk free. She clutched onto her defense attorney for support, muttering, "Oh my God," over and over again. As each charge was read, Rita sobbed aloud. The jury also convicted her of great bodily harm, however, found her not guilty of criminal conspiracy. Larry was also found guilty of murder and great bodily harm. His reaction was stony and silent in comparison to his ex-girlfriend's. Judge Clifton Newman, who was presiding over the case, described the willful recklessness Rita and Larry had shown regarding Cristina. He described their actions as unbelievable and surmised that were to blame. However, Rita interjected at this point, claiming she had never once voluntarily used and that she wasn't guilty of murder, but of negligence. Newman countered with, "As bad as the conduct of Mr. King was, yours was worse in my mind." Larry was sentenced to 32 years for murder, with an additional 20 for great bodily harm. Rita was sentenced to 37 years for murder and an additional 20 for great bodily harm. The case divided the public, with many wondering if the stress and frustration of raising Cristina alone had simply driven Rita into a corner. Others suggested Rita's party lifestyle had become her main priority to the point that nothing else mattered, not even her own flesh and blood. But the one question that no one can quite answer is this: was it premeditated? Yes, there was direct negligence. Yes, it was a heinous crime. But was that Rita's intent? Regardless of the answer, the fact remains that a young girl's life was tragically cut short, and the pain and suffering inflicted upon her are unfathomable.